Welcome. I'm Kristen McAllister, and this is Serious Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or possibly both, thank you for listening. Oh my gosh, today I am excited to welcome Tanya Hampton. A best-selling author, culture strategist. I look at your list of credentials, Tanya, and I don't know if there's anything you haven't done or can't do. I am so excited to spend some time with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you too, Kristen.
I I look at your background. You've had decades of a leadership career. I'm in a similar boat. I've been in one leadership role or another for probably close to 30 years, dating myself now. And regardless of the business environment, there's always been a lot of unknowns and uncertainty. And it seemed like most of the time I was just in a mode of trying to figure it out. From your years of leadership and mentoring and coaching, is this that feeling of I have no idea what I'm doing or I'm in uncharted and unknown territory? Is that common for leaders? Because like they're supposed to have all the answers, right?
Yeah, I can say it certainly is common for me and common as I discovered it through the research that I did, understanding really what are the fears of leaders. And more specifically to myself, the journey of trying to figure it out, I actually enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. I look at ways at which I have done something before in the past and then identify the patterns that are similar to the new situation and apply those patterns. And then be prepared for situations that might not be what I had expected. And then consider who are people that I can learn from. So, what are the different mentors that I've had in the past, or who are people that I can partner with that I don't even know, and get their perspective on a particular circumstance and apply those lessons to my particular situation to move forward and make that unfamiliar familiar, or at least manageable, and still maintain the confidence along the way.
I think there's so much to be learned in there, and you mentioned some research. I want to unpack that a little. So you've done research on fears of leaders. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I interviewed thousands of leaders to understand what were their fears, how did they respond, and what is their relationship with fear. And I did this, Kristen, as a result of being in my dissertation program many, many years ago.
Mhm.
Uh, and yet, the other part of the reason was I was a executive at the time in a healthcare organization, also getting my doctorate, and I had a grandma who was dying of terminal ill cancer. And she was one of the few people that actually funded my ability to go to college. And so I was frightened that I was losing her, and also frightened that I still had this huge deadline that I needed to achieve while also working and being a mom and being a wife. And so I realized that I could not possibly be the only person that is in these types of situations. And I needed to understand more how other people were adapting to their circumstances. Well, I did go off and ask those questions, those three that I mentioned. But what I learned is not what I experienced. And I think in part, the reason why I did not learn the deepest fears that people have is because as leaders, we are not allowed to share those fears and still maintain a status of leadership. Yet, we all have those life experiences that are integrated into the work that we do. And we need to continue to execute and be successful at work. So hence the myth of the fearless leader was created because I wanted to be able to tell my own deepest fears and provide a place and space or opportunity for conversations like this, Kristen, to share what are those deepest fears so that people can actually tap into their own, as well as the 16 universal boiled down to four that I found in my research.
Let's start there. What were the patterns or the most common fears that you found in your research, and then we'll dive into those almost taboo fears.
Yeah, absolutely. So the four that I found that were common were fear of failure, fear of the effect that might occur, fear of really uncertainty, and then fear of not trusting the outcome. So I call it feud, and really
Ah,
saying that we are wrapped around our fears and we're often fighting with them, hence the fight, flight, freeze
Mhm.
mode that we've learned in the talk track. However, with the work, I then decided to provide a different talk track that I hope creates sort of this same effect that the fight, fight, freeze does. And I talk more about how do you engage to know what your fears are? How do you, in fact, explore, have different conversations with others, or learn from your past experience to then create a plan that you can execute? So engage, explore, and execute, contrasting fight, flight, or freeze. That feud framework that I brought up earlier, there are like 16 universal fears that sit underneath that. So a lot of details there. But the feud is a simple way to help to describe what the fears are that are common that we all have.
I mean, you gave the framework of, fear of criticism, fear of unknown, the effect and trusting, and then the fight, flight, or freeze. So the fight, flight, or freeze, we'll call it the F3, uh, really is the response to
Hmm.
here's how I'm feeling. I'm curious, in your research, how did you uncover those fears and maybe some of those really compelling stories or stories that really stood out to you
Mm.
as people were sharing? Because in speaking with business owners, that fear of uncertainty and making the wrong decision, that's huge. I mean, that almost guides decision making on a daily basis. Am I making the right or wrong decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think that the uncertainty is a zapper of
Hmm.
decision making. And the stories that I heard, example that exist, or a few of them, are that leaders would be doing their strategic planning work and uncertain as to whether or not the strategies that they were defining were going to be the ones that really going to take them to the next level. And being confident that they could work with amongst their team members to actually get to the right plan and establish the right metrics, and then be able to look back years. It's not necessarily the effort of doing the planning that concerns them. It's actually bringing it to life. And so when you start to implement, there's this staggering approach of, should I go left or right? Like, which way should I go? And people have to remember to trust their intuition. They have to remember to trust that they have people around them that can help them bring something to life and create an execution and get the results that they want. They also have to remember that even if they don't hit the metrics, there's also a way for them to be nimble and try it again. And so believing in themselves and having some confidence, even in the midst of uncertainty. The core crux of it, I think, is the plan that you put together and that you actually step through that plan. And that's an example of how I saw or heard leaders describe what made them feel solid, right? Certainly it was uncertainty, but their ability to devise a plan, trust other people around them, and work through those steps gave them the
Hmm.
confidence that they could do it even while fear existed.
That's a training. I can see as you lay out the framework and then you combine it with the flight, fight, or freeze, you can see that uncertainty and that fear could be one of the drivers as to how many strategic plans never come to life,
I know, right?
never
They
get
sit on the shelf.
implemented. It's on the shelf, and that's it. We froze.
Hmm.
We just froze.
Yeah, and I say you gotta engage, and you gotta be willing to explore, and then take the steps to execute.
And how do you get them change that mindset? Because that's a big mindset. And we're starting to
Yeah.
see that shift of where we used to all have that fear of failure, because failure
Hmm.
was this horrible, dirty word, versus now it's becoming this celebrated. You can't succeed until you fail at least 100 times. That's
Right.
We're celebrating failure, and I can see how your model and your research starts to bring that to life.
That's right. Yeah. And celebrating the failures are important. Reflecting, our brains learn from experiences, whether they're good or bad. And there's some research that I'm recently learning about that I haven't actually done myself, but it's positive intelligence. And it's looking at
Hmm.
ways at which you can reflect on scenarios and
Hmm.
identify what are the exciting moments in those circumstances. How can you be more positive and learn from that and apply it to your future? The more you reflect, the more you think positive, the more likely you're going to have that positive posture going forward. So if you can practice that, that's important. I personally have helped people to think about what is their lid lifter. I didn't get lid lifter on my own. I actually had my own coach who one time told me, think about your lid lifter. What's the thing that's going to help you flip the situation? And so I tried this. I tried it in a session that I had done some time ago. It's a keynote that I did many years ago. And in that situation, I had all of the participants, there was about 200 of them, think
Mhm.
about what was their lid lifter so that they could reframe the situation that was frightening them. And so they did. And I gave them an example of what my lid lifter was. My lid lifter at the time was that everything is going to be all right. And I learned that actually, my aunt, I give her this signature. She coined me as the one that would start saying that phrase, is Bob Marley's song, when somebody was ill in the family. And so I would, right at the family gathering, say this phrase. And it happened to be that my mother actually was on her hospital bed about 4 days in and 4 days before she passed away. And her and I were together with my aunts in the background, and my aunt encouraged me to go up to her and sing a song. Sing the every little thing is going to be all right. Now I can't sing, but nonetheless, she encouraged
I
me to
can
do it.
imagine. Yeah.
And so I did, and mom repeated it after me. But prior to that uh, circumstance of losing her and sharing that song with her, I just had that phrase as something that would motivate me to do something different. Another phrase I had was newly. Not everyone is going to like you. And this is important as a leader. You want people to like you, you want people to connect with you, but you also have to make sometimes hard decisions where people respond disappointed, but it
Mhm.
was the right decision. And so you have to be comfortable with making those hard decisions, and that framing, not everyone is going to like me, helped me to think about how can I make a decision. And as long as that decision is not going to cause harm, cause someone to bleed, or even harm to you or cause you to bleed, try it. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to do some good to create
Mhm.
change and create an effect. And that practice can help. And so I created those own frames for myself, that lid lifter, and taught and shared it with other people, and it expanded. One of the people that I'll end with this, that was in that session that I mentioned, she expressed that her action coming out of that room was to write a book. And lo and behold, about 6 months later, she did. And her original lid was, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. How can I do this? I'm working. I'm an executive. How possible is this? And lo and behold, like I said, she left the session with her new lid lifter that I can do this. And she did. And she wrote her book.
I like that lid lifter concept. We're seeing that. I love that you're framing it in terms of fears. That what's holding me back? What it's almost like what unsubstantiated belief or almost lie am I telling myself as to why I can't do something?
Right.
What is supporting that fear to be able to take flight or freeze in
Exactly.
certain cases? And you're framing it with the lift up that lid and let's just let the genie out of the bottle. Just let it out and go be awesome. And
Yes.
some of these sounds like examples of how do we are we facing our fears? Are we taking the power away? Are we embracing another approach? What's that transition that you work with people on, or what your research has shown to go, here's what you do with that fear,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
We
here's
are.
your new way of thinking.
That's right. Yeah. We are embracing it. And I also say that we're accepting it. And so by having the conversations with the different leaders, it was them naming that fear and
Wow.
relating to situations where that fear existed previously. They tried it and then they still had an outcome that they were satisfied with. And that rebuilds the confidence. That gives them the sense that, oh, I can do this. And I've had this experience before. And if it wasn't even the exact experience, but it was a situation where there was a much more triumph involved, I was able to survive. And so I must be able to survive yet this smaller thing that's in front of me. So it's getting people to recall and identify ways that they can be successful.
That's powerful. What would be a good example or simple example of having walked someone through that? Because it's tough to think for me to think back, gosh, where how would I apply that? What would be a good
Mhm.
example or common one that you walk through?
Yeah, I always go back to sitting with your team and reflecting on something that you started to implement and reflecting on the lessons learned and truly capturing them. So, looking from end to end of that process or that practice, the initiative that you had implemented, and identifying what were the successes and what were the things that were opportunities, and then putting that to life against another situation that you're needing to move forward on. And so that gives people a sense of a real live work situation where they've looked at a process more thoroughly to identify what were the pain points and what were the successes. Even looking at it from a metrics perspective gives them the confidence of where the highs and the lows were. And when they see those types of trends, they get again enthused by the idea that certain steps got them a certain place, and so
Hmm.
therefore those are the repeatable ones.
I know you reframed it. It wasn't a failure, it was an opportunity and an opportunity
Yeah,
to
yeah.
learn. You said what went well, what went as expected, and where were the opportunities for us to learn from?
That's right. That's right. Because a failure, sure, I think that we can call it that. And yet I think we wrap a lot around that in terms of
Hmm.
weakness. And so if we think about it from an opportunity perspective, there's opportunities in everything that we do or everything that we're handed, even when it hurts. And so if you can see the light in the tunnel, then you can move towards that direction of the light to really keep going rather than feeling failure, where sometimes I think we can sit and feel stuck if we
Hmm.
own the roundness of that failure too much.
Wow. So we're it's this is powerful, especially as leaders, letting go of those fears so you're not because when you're stuck in that flight, fight, or freeze mode, you're not productive, you're not safe, your team's not safe. Just a lot of bad stuff can happen. When you're letting go of that and you're moving to, I think at the beginning you talked about 3 E's.
That's right.
That came out in your research. Tell me more about that. Where do we want to
Yeah.
get to?
Absolutely. So the first one is the engage, and the engage is again naming what is your fear, identifying the patterns in the past that actually you, right, either had success or not. And then that's actually when you can start to shift more towards the explore phase. All along this, you're breathing, right? You're just kind of making sure that you are taking in the energy, whether it's negative or
Hmm.
positive. And then in that exploration phase, you are having conversations with different people to understand what are the different strategies that they've applied. And then you're starting to write down a plan for yourself and outline what are the metrics, what do you want to try to achieve? And then you move forward into the execution and you write, you put that in place and you understand what were the things that worked and what did not work. And if there are things that you want to improve, you start right back over again. So engaging can also be about just really, really recounting the ways at which you can improve the work effort.
Hmm.
And then again, getting more feedback because now you've got a new situation. And so you get the feedback by exploring with other people and then rebuild your plan and start to execute it again.
So I like things written down, told me step by step by step. So when you look at engage, I need to name my fear.
Mhm.
I need to embrace it. Am I writing it down? Am I talking it through with a spouse or coworker? Is this part of a coaching session? Is this done? Are these 3 steps done all at once? Six
Yeah.
in one day. Kind of talk me through from your experience. Is this something that might take a couple weeks the first time you're practicing it, and then it just becomes part of your daily life? How have you seen individuals really implement this so it works in their life?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that it depends on the person and it depends on the situation, how fast or slow you move through it. And there's no right or wrong. From a step perspective, it's really taking that engage part and owning it. So what's the actual fear that you have? Why are you experiencing that fear? How is it making you feel? What's concerning you about it? What might you be able to do differently to be able to move forward? And then that's when you start to move into the explore phase and you start to have conversations. So if you think about it from at an organization perspective, that's where organizations are doing collection of data with their team members to understand what would their team members like to have in place. What does their executive team think that they need to have in place? It's the standard sort of interviews or focus groups to come up with the concepts. And then you start to document what are the steps that you're going to put in place. So that's the project plan or the implementation plan. You also define the metrics that you need to make sure that you are able to measure success. And then you start to create the scorecards, all the tools and resources that you typically would create in your planning phases. And then you move to the execution phase and actually start to go through the steps for implementation and evaluate whether or not you've made the success that you wanted to make. And if not, you start over again.
And every data scientist right now is going, this is my jam. This is, you just walk through it. This is what we use in business, and it can be
Right.
applied to the project management and more of the hard skills, the tactical that we do. You're also framing it in a self-awareness and
That's right.
self-reflection,
Yes, because
looking
it can be for
back.
coaching. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some of those situations that we find ourselves in work, the individuals that you work with, what's that driver that they are coming to you saying, I've got to get past this. I've got to
Yeah,
get past this. Walk me through how to apply the framework to sometimes what's holding me back from taking the next step, what's holding me back from my team respecting me, what's holding me back from what?
right. So I offer up questions that you can ask yourself along the way. And it goes back to those three basic questions that I asked, and then even some sub questions. So the three that I mentioned earlier were, what are your fears? How do you
Mm-hmm.
respond to them? And what is your relationship? And that's a journey that I take my coaching clients through to help them go through their own self-awareness to then establish an understanding of what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And we discover what that is for them or how it might be impacting their team and how it might be impacting their work, which ultimately is the organization. And it becomes a really good process for that individual to go through for building their self-awareness, for building emotional intelligence, getting stronger from a positive
Mm-hmm.
intelligence perspective, and then more team effectiveness and organizational effectiveness. So they've essentially rounded out their presence in the organization and their ability to get work done.
I love it. I what are some ways that that self-awareness and being
Mm,
aware that something's holding me back or this could have gone a lot better. What are some ways that we can practice that mindfulness in order
mm,
to engage with that
yeah.
fear?
I would say that, it's important to pay attention to your senses and how you're feeling in your body to be able to detect whether or not you are feeling like you failed at something or that you're excited about something. And there's a really slippery connection between failure and excitement or scared and
Yeah.
excitement. Yes. And if you can identify a anxiety feeling that you're having, and think about how you are currently thinking about that thing that's giving you anxiety. And then identify ways that you can think more positively about that thing. So, for instance, I used to be scared to death to speak to people. And I realized that my scaredness was more associated with my energy to want to say it versus not say it, right? So, the longer the moment went by that I had to wait to say something, the more anxious I got. And so if you can actually start to tap more into how really am I feeling and what are the energy kind of geysers that are going through my body, you can realize what state you're in, whether it's scared or excitement. And once you get a sense of that, you can continue to mobilize yourself with positive thinking to turn that frightened part of you into having more excitement.
I'd say along those lines, let's take another example. It's very common with speakers, yourself as a keynote. Overwhelming percentage of keynote individuals or those standing up on stage have anxiety, are nervous, are nerve-wracked the night before, the day of, and is my message going to hit with the audience?
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Or am I going to make a fool of myself? Am I going to get booed off stage? Am I going to have a heckler in the audience? Is this going to connect and resonate that they felt this was worth my time? This was of value. Um, where do you pick apart the anxiety that sometimes it's good to feel that as you want to meet expectations versus not getting wrapped up in your head and that
Mm.
fear to the point you're almost sick to your stomach?
Yeah.
How do you
For,
approach that?
yeah, for myself personally, it's getting a focal point, right? So I turn off the voices that are getting loud in my head and
Mm-hmm.
are negative, and turn up the positive voice. Or I might just divert my thinking. So anytime I'm preparing for a talk, I will prepare weeks ahead. What are my talking points? We'll just put it all down. What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? And what's the flow I want?
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, every single time I do that, and then every single time I actually turn around and do the actual keynote, it shows up differently than what I did on paper. But part of that exercise is important because it actually gives me the chance to engage with what I want to say, think about it. How am I feeling about it? Think about what's a different way to do it. I'll do research to bring information
Mm-hmm.
in based on what is going on in the media about that particular group of individuals. And I'll put together the plan. And then the idea of executing it becomes funner or more enjoyable because now I've taken time to memorize or to think about it, feel it, experience it, and practice, literally talk through it. And part of the positive intelligence efforts that you go through is it's really important to have a sense of vibration in your voice or in your thoughts about that experience so that you can remember how exciting that might be. Because getting up on stage and interacting with people, part of it is the enthusiasm that you push through in that presentation. I had a very dear friend who I didn't interview, but could have. She wound up passing away before the book happened. But she always told me, you can tell anybody anything with a smile, whether it's positive or an opportunity,
Yeah.
right? And then from a circumstance where you're giving them negative feedback, start with you care about them. Don't end there because then it's not going to matter. You sort of told them all the bad stuff and then you told them that you care about them. It's kind of like a backhanded slap. We've heard that before. But why not tell them with a smile what you're thinking and actually give them the confidence on the front end that you care about them? And then also give them a sense of how you can support them in order to change. Similar situation, really trying to connect with the person and identify what possibly could be their fears and what possibly could be a way that they need to be different and getting them to their execution plan.
It's interesting is that's the first thing that came to mind as you were talking through that was it's not just our fears, individuals that we're speaking to, and as leaders, we're giving feedback or we've got to deliver some life-changing news is how do we help others embrace and engage and work through some of that. I,
Right.
I love that you mentioned as you're talking about your keynote experience is the story in your head and where so many of the fears come from and the exercises that you walk us through is it's just narrowing down the voices in our head or changing the voices in our head. We all joke of we
Might
have
be a little bit of
multiple
both.
personalities. I always say I've got a party going
Yeah,
on up there at all
right.
times.
All right.
We all do this. It is common. We've got those stories, narratives, voices. Sometimes we give them names. And it's just reframing the what party do I want to be having up there? A pity party or a let's
Right.
go do this party and be
That's right.
fantastic with it. You've given us some great tools. I love the amount of research that went into your book.
Mm.
Um, books are written in different ways with it started out with your doctorate and as part of your thesis. Curious as to was there any aha moments or information that came about that really surprised you
Mm.
either during the research or when writing it? Anything
Yeah.
unexpected?
Well, I would say the thing that wasn't not expected is that I would not uncover deepest fears.
Mm,
But a revelation or a surprise for me, aha moment was, so what? It still presents the opportunity to
Mhm.
have the conversation. And as a researcher of the research work that did, I was to participate in the work myself. So I didn't just put my own deepest fears out there because I wanted to, but in part it was the construct of the work. And I am glad that I had experiences to speak to. I am certain other people have experiences to speak to as well. And so I hope that the conversations that happen either in the coaching sessions that I have or in the larger team meetings that I have, that more of that comes out, those deeper fears, along with the other fears, right?
Mhm.
And that we start to get tap more into our emotions around empathy and compassion for
Mhm.
one another. And we start to realize that fear leadership is not about being fearless, but it's about understanding what your fears are. So I say not N-O fear, but K-N-O-W fear, so that you can, right, really be stronger as a leader and be more healthy accountable, meaning if you're going to commit to something, you actually do it, and that's corresponding or reciprocating. So you and I are in the work together and we're supporting each other, even when we're both scared or when we're both excited.
And being scared is just part of it. If you're not being scared,
It's
then
just right.
you're not
It's just
feeling
the road.
something.
Exactly. It's
This
just the
is just
road of the game.
this
But
is
I'm
part of the
not
process.
blaming somebody because they're
Yeah.
fearful, right? I'm actually understanding what their emotions are and figuring out together how we can make it better.
I love that. My son's middle school has is part of what they're teaching the kids. The word own, own
Mm-hmm.
your actions, own your feelings, own what you do. It becomes part of it. I think that I'm going to own my fears and what I'm scared of. You
Right.
own yours,
That's
but we
right.
can work together
Uh-huh.
past it, support each other, accountable. The exploration, it does take a team. When we have
That's
these,
right.
we may own them. It doesn't mean that we have to own the process. Your
Right.
E3 to engage and explore and execute through it.
That's right.
Tanya, what one piece of advice do you give the most, or you think is the most impactful to help us start to become a fearless leader?
Don't let the fear define you. And
I
that there
love
is, right, there is a success on the other side of that fear. It may not look exactly the way you want it to, but there still can be something that's achieved. And when you land on that point of achievement, there's another opportunity around the corner.
well, I almost just want to end right there, say nothing. Tanya, you're just always so authentic and open, and especially as you start talk about your deepest fears. And I have no doubt the people, the organizations, the teams, and leaders that you're able to help as we explore those to work past what's holding us back to get to the real what impact we can have on the world,
That's
the
exactly it.
impact that we can have on our lives. And you're such an incredible catalyst for that. I want to thank you for your research, your work, and for just sharing all your discussions with me. I value
Mm.
that greatly.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciated the opportunity to have this conversation and be here with you, Kristen.
Fantastic. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.